I'm just gonna do a little voice up.
1 month on TV.
I wanted to alleviate my pain. I also didn't want to be who I was. I always just felt like there was just something wrong with me, and I was trying to figure it out, and I used the internet to help me do that.
Seemingly out of nowhere, we've suddenly seen a huge spike in media depictions and social media depictions of transgenderism. It's even reached the mainstream advertising world.
The people who are consuming this are children, 13, 14, 15 years old, and it's so easy for them to literally be groomed.
I just woke up one day, looked at myself in the mirror, and asked myself, what the heck am I doing?
When trans-identified kids are referred to specialized gender clinics, they're often told that they're going to get comprehensive, multidisciplinary mental health assessments. We know that that's not true.
I was easy to manipulate.
The ideology that has become dominant at these clinics is that trans kids know who they are, and therefore to question them is completely taboo.
My childhood was ruined.
Who's there for their detransitioning? Nobody.
Nobody would help me because they had more concerns of me reversing everything.
Did this thing to alleviate this gender dysphoria that wasn't there before, but you made it into a problem, and now your body image issues are worse. That's not supposed to happen. What do we do now?
So the first question to be asked is, where's the lie? In anything you just saw in that trailer, where is the wrong information? Are there not people who, whenever they undertake this, and I'm just going to not beat around the bush, godless experiment on human existence, are they not allowed to have their voices heard whenever they show dissent against those who have constantly spent their years wanting to encourage them that, hey, there's nothing wrong with this thing, you'll be perfectly fine? And while there are people who later in life decide to do this little thing to themselves, hey, it's a free country, do what you want, I pray against it because I am a Christian, I'm a godly person that hopes that people don't decide to go along with something simply because it's trendy. But for those people who undergo this experiment, what happens when they want to be reverted back? Where are their voices? That's what I like about this trailer. It actually talks about them. They're nowhere. What did that lady say?
Who's there for their detransitioning? Nobody.
So in the end, I think I'm definitely going to see this whenever it comes out. I'll pay money if I have to. So anyway, I was watching this trailer the other day, and I saw it for the first time while I was at work, and it got me thinking. Now, while I am wanting to talk about this, I'm not an expert on this type of stuff. I'm just another average Joe giving my opinion on something. And just because I acknowledge my credentials does not mean that what I have to say is either wrong or undervalued. Because let's be honest, there are a lot of people with PhDs who open their mouth and say a lot of nonsense, and there are a lot of people with GEDs who actually know what they're talking about. And if you want proof, just remember there are people who think we need to encourage socialist philosophies in the United States, despite all evidence throughout the 20th century and into the 21st century that every time socialism has ever touched a country, it died. Every time. And yet you have morons that still, with PhDs and all kinds of doctorates, will convince you it's a good thing. Same thing with this trans stuff. So, at this point, Taylor Swift might as well write a song about these people being, bad choices. Just like all her, romances. Joking aside. I knew I wanted to make a response video, and I thought, why does this all sound familiar? The idea of a bunch of people whose voices are ignored after they've undergone some horrible event on themselves. And it took me a moment, and I finally realized that's Pinocchio. Well, 1940s Disney's Pinocchio. Okay, more accurately, not Pinocchio himself, but the Donkey Boys of Pleasure Island. For those who don't know the story, allow me to elaborate first. Pinocchio is the story of a man named Geppetto who is a single man who doesn't have children, but he makes toys for the children of the village he lives in. And he preys on a star, because he's a pagan, and he wants a family. he prays that Pinocchio was a real boy, kind of like, he basically has the Pygmalion effect. And a little blue fairy decides to come down and grant the wish of the man by giving the puppet life. And then a series of events happen, like him trying to go to work. He tries to go to school and ends up being confronted by a shifty individual named Honest John. Honest John convinces him that rather than going to school, he can just go be an actor by being a living puppet for this guy. I can't remember the guy's name. And he ends up being abused. And so he then ends up running away after the Blue Fairy helps him. And then he tries to go back home where he wants to return to his father, and only to be basically kidnapped again by Honest John, who we find out is working for this coachman who never has an actual name in the movie. And it turns out that the coachman hires guys like Honest John to go and recruit little boys to want to go to Pleasure Island. And when they get to Pleasure Island, it's basically a brutal boy paradise where they go around beating each other up, destroying property, smoking, drinking, eating all the cake and pie they want. By the way, I had a personal note that I thought this giant animatronic thing sounded like Popeye. The Rough House, it's the roughest stuff. Anyway, but then we find out they've destroyed the entire environment, the rides of this what looks like a theme park, and we meet Pinocchio and Lampwick in the little saloon playing pool, or more accurately, Lampwick is playing pool. So he starts playing the character Jiminy Cricket, who from the beginning of the movie, I forgot to mention, has been appointed as the conscience of Pinocchio by the Blue Fairy, and he goes to confront him, and Lampwick basically tells him off, and Pinocchio kind of goes along with it, sort of. And then after Jiminy leaves, making the comment that they're acting like jackasses, this is an early Disney G-rated film where something like that is allowed. And then after that, Lampwick starts turning into an actual donkey and is being horrified by the transformation happening to him, and even Pinocchio sprouts a tail and ears. We then find out in the next scene that the coachman and his crony of hooded individuals are in the business of turning these transformed children into donkeys and selling them to the highest bidders. And there are some signs that say salt mines. However, in one scene, we discover that whenever the donkeys are unable to talk, they're sold off. But the ones that can, they are held back and, whatever happens next to them. Eventually, Pinocchio, with the help of, or guidance of Jiminy, ends up jumping to the ocean and leaving Pleasure Island to swim back to shore. They then go on a series of events and end up finding Geppetto, having been swallowed by the giant, iconically named whale Monstro. They defeat Monstro, and then there's a sad moment, then happily ever after, and the end. Oh, and even though Pinocchio finally becomes a real boy in the end of the movie, we never find out what happens to those donkeys. Oh, and a little side note, this is one of the only Disney movies where the villain actually gets away with it. Anyway. So why do I connect this to Pinocchio? Well, because the idea that the coachman and all the events of Pleasure Island and the transformation of the donkeys tells me that it reminds me of the trans movement, and specifically the DeTrans voices being silenced. So, here's the comparison. The coachman is a horrid politician who simply wants to profit off of laws and regulations that make the opportunity to create a trendy little philosophy a legal concept, hence why there are politicians trying to normalize this across America and Europe. The individual of Honest John and his, I don't remember what this guy's name is, but he, who, by the way, I'll acknowledge, there are two specific scenes that show that he is a phony educator and a phony doctor, so he's neither an educator nor a medical professional. But what is he? A fucking actor.
Come on to the theater. Hi, diddly-dee, an actor's life for me.
Anyway, he represents the activists that want to convince individuals that they are the loving, kind, friendly individuals that you can trust. Everything that they say is worthy of their weight in gold, and they would never lead you astray. And that Pleasure Island is simply... Now, Pleasure Island is a bit stretched because it's just a bunch of people wanting to be rowdy rough boys, but, well, change it into the idea of that blissful place where people can go to have what they want, what they think they want. It's Pleasure Island after all. And then they go to Pleasure Island, have their blissful opportunity, and then are transformed at the end. To which then, what happens to the trans who want to revert back? Well, their voices are silenced. Not killed, by the way, but silenced in the sense that what the internet is used to. YouTube and Google will censor and blacklist websites that try to convince you that there are individuals who, after undergoing this horrible transformation that God has forever cursed with his hatred, that they themselves want to turn back, and they're not allowed to be heard. So when movie trailers like DeTrans come out, it really says a lot when they're having that much of a backlash. So for me, that's why I compare it to the story of Pinocchio. A story about people whose lives have been ruined by a horrible philosophy, and in the process are silenced for daring to speak out against it. I pray for the individuals that they can try to get to what I would call a normal, stable sense of life. Oh, and for all the so-called activists who are going to sit there and claim anything about how you so totally care and I'm nothing but a bigot, I got a question for you. How come the trans suicide rate is 41% compared to any other group in the world? And if you're going to comment that it's because of bullying and social disnormative and stuff like that, and people like me, well, I have a question in response to that. Blacks that were living during the time of slavery and Jim Crow, their suicide rate was never as high as that. Heck, not even that high. So are you honestly wanting to try to say that a bunch of upper class, middle class, privileged white people, because that's the majority of trans people, I should add, are somehow living worse lives than blacks who were during the era of slavery and Jim Crow? Tell that lie with a straight face. So, why is all this even happening anyway? Well, that's because the progressives are simply the idiot grandchildren of a father and grandfather, politically speaking, who are the people who did all kinds of evil, horrible deeds and now are pretending that they never did those things. All the while, the grandchild constantly talks about the evils of age-old racism back in the day, and etc., etc., etc. By the way, that'll be a subject for a video later on, but I just wanted to get that little hint out there. But why is this all really happening? Well, you see, there was a man by the name of Dr. Jon Money, a crazy individual who basically abused 2 boys and got away with it. He was the person to coin the term gender identity. He was the cause of why 2 boys, twins, who later in life committed suicide in different ways after undergoing the horrible experiments and so-called therapy treatments from the doctor, to whom he also took a picture of on one occasion. What were those therapy sessions? Oh, engaging in sex role play with each other, even though they were, siblings. And to which he took a picture on one occasion. And people believed that he was right because he was a scientist. That'll be a video for later. But anyway, all I can say is that this needs to stop. This whole trans movement is just a bunch of indoctrination to convince children to be turned into something they're not. Oh, and one last little commentary I want to make before I finish this video. This is my personal theory about why all this is happening. See, for me, the trans, child grooming, and all that kind of stuff that's going on right now is simply a normalization of child prostitution. Because, well, think about the coachman. It costs a lot of money to have to go and get these kids and bring them back to the island and have to do all the shipping and handling, rebuilding of the park. I mean, Matt Patton, Film Theory, did an entire video on the subject. But with that being said, imagine the people who don't want to have to spend millions of dollars going to a private island like Epstein Island. Oh, I'm sorry, did I say it out loud? Epstein Island, in order to be able to have their private little indulgences in a enclosed, spying eye-free environment to do their little dirty deeds, but instead would love to just go down the street, kind of like where you go to your local porn shop and get all your dirty activities at your local brothels and your prostitutions, and they want to legalize all of that so that it can be normalized and they don't have to spend so much money. So how do they do it? Well, they encourage the activists. They encourage the normalization in schools. And they encourage saying that people like me are nothing but closed-minded bigots who simply hate individuals who don't want to find out what they really are, when in reality what they quote-unquote really are nothing but tools used by individuals who really just want to get their rocks off. So, that's my commentary about all of this. My theory, my response, and to all, I leave you with the reminder that God does love humanity. He died for sin. He died for us to be free from sin, I should say. And the truth is, we need to go back to Him. These are the end times. The normalization of degeneracy will only get worse and worse as the sun goes down. To anybody who understands the parable of the vineyard operators, the workers, you'll understand that metaphor. So, save as many souls as you can and tell the truth, because there will come a time when they will beg and plead that they would have listened, but it'll be too late. So listen and believe, as the movement says. Good luck. Oh, and one last thing. For all those people who hate the Bible, it's not a coincidence that they actually believe one part of it, which is why they believe so strongly in indoctrinating these people at a young age. Proverbs. Train up a child in the way they should go, and when they are older, they will not depart from it. Well, if that child is put on a good track, then of course they won't depart from that whenever they're older. But whenever you've put them on bad tracks that ruin their life for the rest of their life, it's no wonder that the one thing these people are waiting for is either if some way that they can get back on a good track, or even a stable track. Otherwise, they're just waiting for the day where they derail. And I promise you, suicide is not the answer. God bless, good journey, Christ loves you, and take care.